On today's show, Evan Mobley being the full-time five for the Cleveland Cavaliers would be the best thing that they can do next season. I'll tell you why.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. The best way you can help grow the show. Listen on podcasts, give us 5 stars, review the show, subscribe on YouTube, like the video on YouTube, comment on YouTube. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, obviously on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Danny Cunningham, still a little new here at Locked On Cavs. Hope you're starting to get to know me just a little bit. You might know me. I've covered the Cleveland Cavaliers for quite a while now, previously at ESPN Cleveland, currently at 92.3 The Fan and Cleveland Magazine as well. You might know me from those places. Maybe you know me now from Locked On Cavs. That would be great. Maybe you know me from some other places I've been, including Score North, where I cover the Minnesota Timberwolves, or Complex, where I've covered the NBA and the NBA draft. We will certainly be getting into plenty of draft stuff in the next couple of weeks before that day arrives, coming up at the end of this month. But today, what I really want to get into is Evan Mobley, because I think that he is the key to raising the Cavs' ceiling as high as it needs to be. Because now we're talking about an organization that for the last couple of years, despite how good they've been, it hasn't been a championship or bust situation. And I don't think next year is necessarily a championship or bust situation either. But I think we're getting closer to those days. Those days are on the horizon if everything does go correctly for the Cavs. And I think Evan Mobley is a big, big reason as to why. So let's take a step back on Mobley a little bit. We know he's the number 3 overall pick a couple of years ago. His rookie year, thought he was really, really impressive on both ends of the floor. Cavs make it to the play-in, lose ultimately a game to the Brooklyn Nets, and then another game to the Atlanta Hawks, so they don't make the playoffs. Year number 2, Cavs are in the playoffs. Evan Mobley, a Defensive Player of the Year finalist, ended up finishing 3rd in that voting behind Jaren Jackson Jr. of the Memphis Grizzlies and Brook Lopez of the Milwaukee Bucks. Cavs lose in the first round of the playoffs. Evan had a great year defensively, but there were some, I think, causes for concern offensively. And then this year for Evan, we know the Cavs made it to the second round of the playoffs, but Evan dealt with some injuries, missed a bunch of time due to a knee surgery, had an ankle sprain later in the year that caused him to miss a little bit of time. But I think that there were things at the end of the season that really should be reasons to believe that Mobley is going to continue to grow and is far from a finished product. That's something that I do think that we've learned from what his first couple of years in the NBA have been. And when Mobley's name comes up, and this is particularly when Cavs president of basketball operations, Kobe Altman, is talking about Evan, one of the things that he is very quick to mention, and this is something that I actually do really agree with when it comes to Mobley in specific, is that every game Evan Mobley has played in his career, just about every game he's played in his career, has been a game that has mattered. Because normally when you see a number 3 pick enter the league, they're joining a bad team, right? You don't get it's very rare that you're a good team and you end up picking inside the top 3 or top 4. That's just not something that happens very frequently in the NBA. And to be fair, the Cavs weren't very good before Evan Mobley arrived, but the year that he was drafted, they were ready to take a pretty big step, and they did so. So that year, normally, when you're talking about a high lottery pick, that year is oftentimes, hey, this is about you. It's about allowing you to develop. It's allowing you to grow. And Evan did that on the fly, but he didn't have the same opportunity to, I think, fail. And I know that sounds weird because it's not as if, he's failed at a bunch of things. But sometimes in the NBA, especially when you're a high pick like that, on the offensive end in particular, you sort of have to take your lumps. And the Cavs didn't necessarily have time for that because winning was prioritized, which is a rare thing. In the long run, I think it's an awesome thing for Evan Mobley, but it's a rare thing, and it creates a different way of development, if you will. That most lottery picks like that aren't developed inside of a winning team. They're not in a winning locker room right away. And Evan was, but I do think that is part of the reason why, as we are starting to look ahead now to year number 4 with Evan Mobley, I think that's part of the reason why the offense maybe hasn't gotten to where I think a lot of people would have liked it to be at this point. The other thing that I do think is holding Evan Mobley back from achieving what I do ultimately believe he will get to offensively is I think it's time that Evan Mobley becomes the full-time center. Maybe full-time is a little bit strong. Maybe you want to have another center. Maybe there should be times where he's playing with another big guy on the floor. But I truly do think that to unlock his full potential as an offensive player, Evan Mobley needs to play in a little bit more space than the Cavs have been able to provide. And right now, spacing-wise, they've had Donovan Mitchell, they've had Darius Garland in the backcourt. Those guys are going to create space. The problem has been in the front court, to where Evan has, while he shot the three-pointer well this past year, he doesn't take a lot of them. So he's not someone that you look at as a space creator. Jarrett Allen, the term that I think has been thrown out at times is he's created vertical spacing, which, to be honest, I really don't quite all the way understand, and I don't think Jarrett all the way quite understands it. I know he's said as much at times. I'm not sure if he's changed on that. He creates that type of spacing, but he doesn't create spacing on the floor, not that traditional floor spacing that you're talking about. I think for Evan to thrive offensively, he needs to be in a situation where that is there, where that traditional floor spacing is something that can be relied upon, but he can't be the one to create it. That's not who he is at this point in his career. Yes, he shot 37% from 3. I'll get to that coming up a little bit later in today's show, but that he can't be the one that's tasked with creating that. And I do want to, coming up in a little bit, talk about a comparison that I think is fair and interesting to make when you talk about Evan Mobley and who to compare him to in this type of situation. But in the situation that he's been in, Mobley's not respected as a shooter. Jarrett Allen isn't a guy that's going to ever really take three-pointers. Like, when he does, it's kind of like, oh my goodness, he's taking that shot. That's the situation it is. So with that, it makes it more difficult, I think, for Evan to operate when he can't find that space, when he's searching for the right areas to go to, and those areas are smaller because defenses are able to pack the paint a little bit in today's day and age. With Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley both on the floor, that's one less guy they have to worry about defending out on the perimeter. And I think that has really been, and I know so often we talk about the effect that that has on the backcourt because it can clog up driving lanes for those smaller guards that the Cavs have. But I think it impacts Evan Mobley's ability to go get his own baskets a little bit as well. Because when he's around the rim, not only does he have to deal with the guy he's defending, but pretty frequently he's had to deal with the guy that is maybe defending Jarrett Allen too. And I do think at times we've seen Evan be able to throw a lob. He's, I think, a really, really good passer. Especially in those big-to-big situations, which is a very difficult thing, and it's a really rare thing in the NBA because you don't see a ton of teams that find themselves in that situation. I think both, actually, to Jarrett Allen's credit too, I think both those guys are really good big-to-big passers, and I think that's part of the reason why the Cavs have been able to make the two big lineups work as well as they can. But I do think that we're sort of reaching a ceiling to what those two can be offensively, because I don't think that Evan can necessarily break through his own ceiling in the current setup that he's in right now. I do think that if some things change, and I actually think there's some really low-hanging fruit here for Evan and the Cavs to really be able to go out and grab, that'll make life a lot easier for him offensively and really make life a lot easier for the Cavs offensively as well. Going to get to that later in the show, but I teased that there's a comparison that I think is worth bringing up. Not because the two players are the same, but there are some things that the Los Angeles Lakers used to do with Anthony Davis that the Cavs maybe should consider doing with Evan Mobley. That's next right here on Locked On Cavs. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online. It is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. I know a lot of people right now are working from home. You can try BetterHelp at home during your lunch break. If you can get some time off work during the day, that's how convenient flexible, and suited to your schedule that BetterHelp can be. Go online, fill out a very brief questionnaire, and you can get matched with a licensed therapist. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. We all know how difficult it can be at times to find, and I think it's something that is really important to find a therapist that you feel like you work well with. That is something that is a really important part of this process. So being able to switch therapists at any time for no additional charge, I think is a really, really great feature of BetterHelp. Talking to someone helps. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today and you get 10% off your first month. That's 10% off your first month. That's a really, really valuable thing, something that absolutely can help you help yourself. Go to, again, betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. So the Los Angeles Lakers obviously have had Anthony Davis now for a number of years. And when I talked about splitting up Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen on yesterday's show, a lot of the comments were, well, look at Anthony Davis. He has played alongside another big at times. And you know what? You're 100% right. And I think that's actually a really good thing to bring up. So I went back and I looked at that Lakers championship run back in the bubble in 2020, because I think that's Evan is not at that point in his career, particularly what Anthony Davis had shown prior to then offensively. Like, they're not the same player. They're not at that point. But I thought that was a really good exercise to go back and look at as far as Anthony Davis playing next to another big. So you think about that Lakers team, JaVale McGee was on it and Dwight Howard was on it. Team won a title. They were awesome. I know that the pandemic interrupted the season, but they were on pace to be the 1 seed. I think it is a very legitimate title. I cannot stand the Astros talk, the Mickey Mouse title. I cannot stand all that. I think it was incredibly difficult to win. And Anthony Davis was a big reason why. He was awesome in that postseason. And, people talk about how he wasn't playing center full time. And you're right, he wasn't. But he was playing a lot of center. Where, Dwight Howard would start games or JaVale McGee would start games, but those guys weren't in the same situation that the Cavs are in. And I think that is something that is very, very important to bring up when you think about this. Because, okay, JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, they played a lot, right? Like, you think about that in your memory. So I went back and I looked it up. Those two in the playoffs, JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard in the playoffs for the Lakers, combined to play 25 minutes a game. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know NBA games are 48 minutes. So that leaves, 23 minutes of other time to be played at center. Someone has to play center for those other 23 minutes. Well, Anthony Davis was playing 36 minutes per game in the playoffs. Pretty standard number. That means he was playing roughly, 22 or 23 minutes at center on that team in the playoffs, which is, you can do the math. That's like 2/3 of his minutes that he's on the floor. He's playing center. Yeah, he wasn't starting at center. He was starting at power forward, but those two other centers weren't playing enough to where Anthony Davis wasn't considered the main guy at that position. During that postseason run for the Lakers, Davis played 915 possessions at center. Like, that's a ton. 98th percentile. Lakers were plus 15.3 per 100% possessions in that setting. If you don't think that Evan Mobley should be the full-time center, if you don't want him going out there to start a games, being the guy in the center circle, okay, I get that. But what I think needs to be possible here is when the moments are the biggest, Evan Mobley needs to be able to be the guy that is at center. You're always going to want your best players on the floor in those moments. I think we can all agree there. And we can also all agree right now that Jarrett Allen is one of the best players on the Cavaliers. There's not a discussion about that. He is. But because, if you look at that Lakers team, Dwight Howard wasn't one of the best players. He was a role player. JaVale McGee was a role player. Like, that point in each of their careers, those guys were journeymen. So if when it got into a super high leverage, big stakes moment, it didn't matter if those guys were on the floor because so often they weren't part of the best five for the Lakers. Because the Lakers could go to Anthony Davis at center and just dominate teams. And there's not a large enough sample size, I don't think, yet to back that up with Evan. And I don't think Evan's been ready for this up until this point. I think that we're getting to that point with him where he will be ready for this. When push comes to shove for the Cavs, right now, it's really difficult, and it's a really difficult sell to say, hey, Jarrett Allen is an all-star caliber center. I believe that. But we need to close games with him not on the floor. We need to close games routinely. I'm not talking a one-off because that'll happen, but we need to routinely close games, or we need to routinely play in the biggest spots without him on the floor. That doesn't make sense, right? That's why I do think that moving on from him this summer is the best course of action, because it's something that will open up that position for Evan Mobley to be in. That's something that when I think about that past situation, about other guys that have similar builds, similar skill sets to Evan Mobley, but don't play center all the time, I think that's actually a really good way to look at it. I do. But I also have to remember, yes, that's true, but there wasn't also an all-star caliber center on the roster with them. There might have been a role player center, and that's all well and fine, and that's important, and that's helpful, but there wasn't someone that you could look at and say, hey, you're someone that gets votes for Defensive Player of the Year, as Jarrett Allen got a vote this year, I believe it was one. You're someone that's been on an all-star team. You're someone that's had, or, at this point in your career, because obviously Dwight Howard is a future Hall of Famer, had been on an all-star team, but at that point in his career was a role player. And there was no question about it. The same can't be said for the situation the Cavs are in right now, and that's what complicates things. That's why I do support, maybe Evan's not the full-time starting five. Maybe you still want to start him at power forward. I can get on board with that. But I do think that when the lights are the brightest and the moments are the biggest, going to lineups that have him at center need to be something that's not just on the table, but something that's routine. Because I think that will do so much to elevate the offensive game of everyone else on the floor. And I think it'll make Evan a much better offensive threat. And I really don't believe that you're giving away much defensively. Like, yes, Jarrett Allen is an awesome defender. And actually, the thing I think that Jarrett Allen does the best defensively, this is going to sound like a shot, but I promise it's not. But he's such a good rim defender that it allows Evan to be in that free safety, roamer type of role and really dominate the game and defend some of the other team's best players. And he can't necessarily do that if he has to worry at times about being a rim defender. So that is something that's kind of the hole here in this. Like that, if you want to argue this, that's where it is. But offensively, I think it would be such a big step up for the Cavs in crunch time, and that's when we've seen them struggle to score, right? Like you look at in the regular season, the offense really doesn't suffer a whole ton, but over the last 2 years, they have at times really struggled down the stretch of games. And then we also saw them during the playoffs struggling to crack 100 points in times. And yeah, the defense is great, but you need to be able to get a bucket when you need to get a bucket in the playoffs. And I think that this is one of the biggest avenues for the Cavs to be able to get there. If they do this, it's not saying that every moment Evan Mobley's on the floor, he needs to be playing center. I truly don't believe that to be true. But that number needs to be higher than what it's been. It probably needs to be closer to 70% of the time he can play center. And also, when it really matters, he can play center. Right now, with the way that the Cavs can split up lineups, he can play a lot of center, but it's hard to play him at the end of games at center. And I think that is something that would really elevate the Cavs if they can do that moving forward. If in the future, that can be part of what they go to. That can be part of their a card they have up their sleeve. I really think that's something that would be very, very beneficial for the Cavaliers. I do think with Evan Mobley, there's some low-hanging fruit that the Cavs can go out and grab that'll make him more impactful offensively. I'll tell you what that is next. But today's show also brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in both the NBA and NHL. The NBA Finals are almost here. It feels like it's been forever since we've had a basketball game. This layoff has just been awful. I cannot wait for Dallas and Boston to start up game 1 Thursday night. And, as I look at FanDuel, as I'm looking at the odds, as I pull it up right now on my computer to see, there's a lot of stuff that you can look at. Game 1, Boston favored by 6.5. I don't know how much I want to bet on the individual game. I do think that there are a lot of good series props. One of the ones that's my favorite is the finals MVP plus the correct score to the series. Maybe you really feel strongly that the Dallas Mavericks are going to win this series. And if that happens, I think everyone here could probably agree Luka Doncic going to be finals MVP, right? So maybe you think the Mavs win in 6 and Luka wins finals MVP. You can get that right now on FanDuel at plus 600. That is an awesome, awesome value. Or maybe you think Boston's going to win in 5 games. You think Jason Tatum's going to be great. You can get that paired together at plus 470. That's the direction that I would go when I'm looking on FanDuel, looking to find out how I want to place my wagers on the NBA Finals. And, right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So I mentioned some low-hanging fruit with Evan Mobley and what the Cavs can do offensively to really make him feel more impactful. And the first thing that's always going to come up is the three-point shooting. Evan's three-point shooting really did improve this year. He shot 37%, a little over 37% from beyond the arc during the regular season. A lot of that came after he returned from his knee injury where he had surgery and missed 6 weeks. And just from watching, I did think that his shooting improved. Without looking at any statistics and anything like that, just to the naked eye, just the eye test here, I thought that his shooting was better after the surgery. His form looked good. It looked a little quicker. I thought he had a much more confident stroke. And that's something that I do believe matters when you're sticking him out there, whether it's in the corner, whether it's on the wing, even top of the arc shots. I do think all of those things mattered. And I think all of those things improved. It's not that he needs to improve as a shooter anymore at this point. If he shoots 37% from deep from the rest of his career, that is fantastic. That is absolutely awesome. But what I do think needs to improve is the volume at which he's taking those three-pointers. Where last year, he was a low-volume three-point shooter. He was taking, I believe the number was 1.2 a game. That's not high enough for him. That's not high enough to be an effective three-point shooter. If he's playing center full-time next year, and I don't think this will be the case. I don't think he's going to play 100% of his minutes as center. But let's say he plays 100% of his minutes at center and he's not responsible for spacing the floor. I still think that number needs to be higher. If he's playing all of his minutes at center next year, he still needs to be shooting more than 3 three-pointers a game. Still needs to have that as part of his game. Still needs to keep defenses honest by doing that. If he's playing power forward more often than not, it needs to be around 5 three-point attempts per game, because then at that point, he is responsible for some of the spacing. And that's when you start to think, okay, well, this feels like a lot of three-pointers for Evan Mobley, and it does, but that's part of the way that you create space as an offense is by having a forward that can stretch the floor. I think Mobley's capable of it. I don't think that he necessarily would be best suited doing that, though. I don't think you're maximizing him like that, but I think that's some low-hanging fruit that could easily improve what the Cavs are doing offensively. Next up, and this really for me is the biggest one, and the one that I sort of think can be the easiest one to improve, I really believe Evan Mobley needs to improve as a screen setter. His screens right now are not good enough. For this past season, he ranked in the 35th percentile as the screen setter in a pick and roll. And next year, if he is playing center more often than not, the Cavs are going to run quite a bit of pick and rolls. That's what the offense is going to be. It doesn't matter who the coach is. That's something that's going to be a fixture of the offense, right? Like we see that in the NBA every single day, every single game you watch. You see a ton of pick and rolls, particularly with the center setting them. I think that improving as a screen setter, and I expect him to add strength this year, maybe put on a little bit weight. I think if he improves as a screen setter, that's going to be another thing that maybe doesn't elevate his numbers. Like that's not something that's going to pop up in the box score, but I think that will really help to elevate the Cavs on offense, because right now that is the one thing that you point at and say Jarrett Allen does that so much better than Evan Mobley, where Jarrett Allen, I believe, was in like the 78th percentile as the roll guy on a pick and roll. And I really don't believe that's because Jarrett's a better finisher or Jarrett's a better passer or all this. I think it's because Jarrett's a better screen setter and creates more space for those guards. And if Evan can do that, if Evan can, maybe it's a jump from the 35th percentile to the 55th percentile. It's not going to be, this is one of those things, Rome's not built in a day, right? Like you're not all of a sudden going to become Rudy Gobert and be the screen assist king of the NBA, but he can improve. And I also think part of it, if he's creating more of that space, if he's setting better screens, I really do think he's a good passer on the short roll. I think he's a solid finisher. And I think when he's going downhill is when he's at the best with the basketball in his hands. The last thing that I have here is the Cavs playing at a faster pace. The last 2 years, they've been one of the slower teams in the NBA. And part of that is because of personnel. Part of that's for, defensive reasons. Part of that, I think, has been coaching. But at the end of the day, I don't know that there's anyone to blame it on. It's just a difficult thing to play as a fast team when you've got two big guys on the floor. It's a really challenging thing. That's part of the reason why you don't see a ton of teams operate with two bigs, because you really can't run up and down the floor. But what have Evan's best moments offensively been? For the most part, it's been when he's been able to get out in transition and go, where he can grab the ball off the rim, go, start a fast break, be that guy that can really do it all there. Seeing more of that, allowing the Cavs to play faster through Evan Mobley, I think really should be the next step in his offensive development. It's not the three-point shot. It's not back to the basket stuff. It's getting Evan the ball while he's moving and letting him attack. That's the stuff that I think he actually probably has the highest upside with. And if the Cavs are able to do that, they're probably doing that because Evan is the only big guy on the floor. Because it's hard to play fast. It's really hard to play fast when he's not playing center, because that means there's someone bigger than him on the floor, and that makes it a little bit more difficult for the team to get up and down and run. Not saying that to be the 7 seconds or less Suns, because I don't believe that to be the case. That wouldn't be maximizing the talent. But I do think that that is one area where they could improve their offense and just some low-hanging fruit. Love doing the show again today. Again, I'm Danny Cunningham. I'm new here. You might know me from Cleveland Magazine. You might know me from 92.3 The Fan, maybe ESPN Cleveland. I want to allow you guys to get to know me a little bit better, and I want to get to know you guys a little bit better and what you're looking for out of the show, what you really care about with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Friday's episode is going to be a mailbag episode. You can leave comments on YouTube, questions you want answered. It's maybe not all the way as an Ask Me Anything. I'd like to keep it geared towards the Cavs, but definitely can sneak in one or two that might not be super heavy on the Cavs. Find me on Twitter at RealDCunningham. Send your questions there, but I'm really looking forward to being able to do that. Really looking forward to getting to know you guys, for you guys to get to know me. I think that this is going to be a lot of fun. Again, I'm super excited about getting to do this show. It's been a blast so far. I can't wait to keep going. So again, if you've got mailbag questions, throw them in the chat here. Send them to me on Twitter or email at lockedoncavs@gmail.com. I'll get to those on Friday. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day.